A very good evening, everybody. Farm fear fáilte roih go léir is dach hiag imachtaí na híthe nacht. I'm Agnes Cogan, and I'm the chair of the Royal Television Society Republic of Ireland Centre. We're an educational charity which promotes the art and science of television, and we encourage and celebrate television work in all its aspects and its allied fields. And to that end, I'm delighted to be able to introduce to you tonight our very distinguished guest, Diarmuid Goggins, who is the director of the undoubted hit of this season, Kin. It's that dark, gritty, grim, gripping series, Gangland series that's on at the moment and that has us all on the edge of our seats on Sunday evenings. Diarmuid, you're very welcome.
Thank you very much, Agnes. Nice to be here. Nice to see
you. Diarmuid, I'm going to be shooting questions at you from all sorts of angles. But before that, I just want to tell our viewers that which I'm sure you will, have lots of questions for Diarmuid. We'll have a question and answer session towards the end of this hour. And I would be delighted if you would put your questions into the question and answer box, which is at the lower right, it's at the bottom of your screen towards the right hand side. You can put them into the chat if you want, but it would be less likely to get lost if you put it into the Q&A box. Okay, so let's get started. Okay, Diarmuid, first of all, tell me, what made you decide to be a film director? What interested you? What started you?
I think there was a kind of a moment. My brother was big into movies as a teenager, and he collected Empire magazine, which was the movie magazine at the time and probably still is. And in one of them, one of the magazines, there was a supplement about a behind the scenes. Basically, it was a section of 30 to 40 images of behind the scenes. And two of the images struck me. One of them was from a film set, and it had a dolly and tracks. Just had the camera on a dolly, and the camera was, moving back and forth. And it struck me that for the first time that there was people actually made this. I thought, oh my God, I didn't realize that people actually made this. And it's also started a fascination with me and tracking. My Twitter handle is Tracks Goggins because I love tracking. Constantly think moving the camera is a very exciting thing. And the other image that was in the Empire magazine was a picture of from a Frankenstein film. It was a picture of Frankenstein and the doctor, and it was the monster and the doctor of Frankenstein on the set. And basically they were taking a smoke break. And so they're basically dressed in full outfit. The monster had a smoke and the doctor basically had a cigarette in their mouths. And I thought, it kind of broke that fourth wall for me. And I thought, my God, these guys actually do this for a living. I always thought it was real, and it kind of broke that myth for me. So in a way, smashed the dream that the films I watched weren't real, but also opened my eyes to the fact that that was a career that I potentially wanted to follow and jump into. And from then on, my own mother I kind of did a lot of video work for the school. She was a teacher. She used to video communions and confirmations. And so she had a little video camera, a portable video camera she brought home. And I used to make little short movies. My sister collected Sylvanian families, and I used to make stop motion films with the Sylvanian families. And I basically try to, find the way to filmmaking. And at that very early days, I didn't understand there was such a thing as editing. So I shot everything in one. Which is something I do as a director very much now. I'm really big into a oneer as a director at the minute. And then I realized there was editing and the process of editing. And so it developed from there. And I realized, I suppose, as I got into college or into school, that as I'd go to college, I wanted to go to art school or film school. And that's what I did. I went to Dún Laoghaire and did a 3-year diploma in Dún Laoghaire and studied the craft of filmmaking, I suppose. And from there came out into the world, dreaming of Hollywood and realizing that it wasn't going to be my first port of call, and I'm still not there yet. But there's time.
Wonderful. And can you tell me what, I know you've worked on many very interesting and well-known series. You've worked on Silent Witness, Casualty, Red Rock, among many others. You've picked up several awards and citations along the way. Is there anything in particular that helped you with your work on Kin?
I think everything helped towards Kin in a way. I think that everything is a stepping stone to the next job in a way. And I think part of certainly my career, certainly as a director, it's about finding a voice as a director, finding what it is that is your voice, that is your vision. I suppose it is what defines you from the rest or from the next. And so over the course of all the shows that I've done, I've experimented with things that I thought were me, some of which I found out were not me, and some of that I found were me. And I think on every show, and still you still experiment a little bit to try and find out what it is that excites me as a filmmaker, and what is it that drives me to make films, and the films I want to make. So I think every one of them does something. I think, you talk of shows like Red Rock. Red Rock was done on a micro budget, where we shot pretty much an hour of television in something like 6 or 8 days, sometimes even 5 days. It was a crazy schedule. And then you go to something like Casualty, where you have 2 weeks, 10 days to make an hour of television, and so what you learn is that directing is also about the craft of storytelling and how you want to tell your vision, but it's also about time management. Huge amount of directing is about time management. You try and in a way, it's 50% of your job is storytelling and telling the story, but 50% of your job is telling the story on time, and on the time that's been allotted for that day. And that's a quite challenging aspect. I probably come from a very visual background. Some directors come from an AD background, are much better at time management. Time management is probably not my strong point. I'm quite aware of it, but it's I'm constantly pushing and trying to strive for the best. And sometimes that pushes you into overtime, or to taking more time on one scene than the next scene, and that so I'm trying to get better at that.
Your approach to direct. So that's your very visual approach to direction. So if you were making a pitch, how would you go about it?
So I'm gonna for Kin, for example, one of the things that you do as a director when you pitch for a job, is you'll obviously have a meeting and a chat with the showrunner Peter, and then also the producers that were involved in it. But it's also, because it's such a visual medium, it's really important to either do a director's statement and sometimes a mood film. I like to do what's called a mood film or a mood reel, which is a visual representation of my take on the show. So kind of 1 minute to 2 minutes of other films, existing films, put together with a piece of music to give you a sense of what my take on the series would be. So for Kin, I did a mood reel, which I'm gonna share with you. It's I think about 2 minutes.
Wow.
Yeah. So
that got you the job.
That and a director's statement that I wrote. At the time, my wife was expecting our second child, and we were the kind of throes of basically putting together this pitch, and I had to write a director's statement, and I had to go into the hospital, and because COVID was rife at the time, I wasn't allowed to go into the hospital, and so I had to sit in the wall outside. And so rather than just sit there wondering what was going on, I decided to actually write the director's statement for Kin. And because I suppose Kin is about family. First and foremost, it's about family. And so the kind of gangster elements to me were always kind of wallpaper in some ways. What struck me on my first read of the scripts were the fact that it was about family. And so just about to become a father for the second time, I felt I kind of connected with the script in a very emotional way, in that how much pressure is put on you as a father, as a parent, and the kind of strifes and the pains and the miseries that brings you, and the notion of losing a child, and how one copes with that or deals with that, certainly played heavy on my mind, even though I was waiting to welcome a child. At that time, it's quite a scary place, and so I'd read that script, and so I wrote a director's statement very much in that moment, from a very emotional and kind of real place at the time, and I think that resonated with Peter and the producers. And as a supplement, I did that mood reel, which was again, after reading, I think 2 or 3 scripts, very, very early stages, no conversations with anybody, was just very much a first interpretation. And some of what's there, certainly the breaking the fourth wall, the lens stuff is there. And I think tonally as a piece, it's quite significant that it's quite similar to how Kin ended up as well.
That's very much a feature of Kin in particular, the breaking of the fourth wall. You have the characters looking directly into camera, which, you know, it needs a very strong performance, doesn't it, you know, from the actor, and a really good expressive face to be able to carry that.
Yeah, I mean, thankfully, you know, one of the things we had on Kin obviously was an incredible cast, you know, a really top-notch cast of super experienced actors who all have, you know, great faces, one, but also are just top performers, you know, and I think understand the camera as a tool, and so know that when it comes close, what needs to be done, or what needs to be done. So much that it's about, so much about it is about as little as you can do, but also doing as much within as little, which is always the difficulty with acting. But yeah, the fourth wall thing, I'm not really sure where it came from. So it was an instinctive, guttural thing at the time, where when I read the script, it just felt to me at very key emotional moments that the actors should kind of engage directly with the lens, but thus engaging directly with the audience. And that what it does is, eye line is a very important thing with the camera, and where the eye line should be. And when I say eye line, it's the position of the camera to the actor. And so a lot of the time when we're doing dialogue scenes, the camera will be over a shoulder. So what we've done is broken that and put it a much closer eye line. So instinctively, or what it is really, is that the audience are looking into the actor's eyes and the actors are looking into the audience eyes. And so I suppose in that way, it's also, there's no place to hide. You know, I always kind of found there's no place to hide, A, for the actor, but B, for the storyteller. It's an emotional and strength truth. You know, when the camera is that close, there is no lying. And I kind of find at that point, visually, that's what we were trying to do, was kind of I'm kind of really excited by the subjective camera that in some ways is emotive, whereas if there could be we could go to a cinema and you can, where you can kind of smell, you know, what could go on. I find that fascinating. The notion that you can kind of sense or feel exactly what the audience or the character's feeling is quite exciting.
Do you have any examples of that you could show us?
I do actually. Yeah, I can show you. I can show you one. I can show you two actually, but I'll show you one too. Let me share my screen again. Probably one of the most powerful ones was one at a funeral sequence with Ciarán Hinds. So I'll just play this. It's about 30 seconds long.
My deepest sympathies. Your son is in my thoughts and prayers.
Thank you.
That's he has an amazing face. He has a wonderful face, Ciarán Hinds. You know, all of the cast are wonderful. And that's one of the things that I wanted to ask you about, working with actors. You know, you've had a lot of experience, what with Casualty and Red Rock and Silent Witness and all the others. So what has that kind of taught you about working with actors and how to direct them and how much direction they need?
As part of a director, is you're many things. You're kind of a mother, a father, an analyst, a psychoanalyst, a psychotherapist. It's about, I think for me, working with actors is about trying to make the actors feel as comfortable as they possibly are in their own skin. The actor is one of the biggest collaborators that a director works with, and so they have their own ideas and ambitions and thoughts. And a lot of time, I always feel sometimes the actors know the characters deeper and more emotionally than the director, but I sometimes know the scripts, the ins and outs of the scripts and the characters' journey through the scripts slightly better sometimes than the actors. And so, sometimes I think that's where the symbiosis is that it's working with them to kind of make sure beat wise and story wise that they're in the right headspace and zone. Quite often when we shoot TV shows, we shoot them completely out of schedule. So the opening scenes of Kin, I'm pretty sure we shot episode 4 first, the very first day, and you work backwards. So sometimes trying to cart out the journey particularly Amanda's journey and Kin, where that starts and where that will end, is something that's really, really important for the director and the actor to sit down along with Peter, the showrunner, to try and figure out what that arc is and how we'll do it, so that we know almost where we're going to end up before we start, because we shoot it out of sequence. And it's sometimes the actor is very much being in the moment, in the scene, and sometimes it's the director's job just to maybe clarify where they've come from, where they've been, and just to discuss previous scenes and where this is fitting in the greater overall scheme of things. So, but I think fundamentally it's about, I try and gauge what actors need from me, and some actors need a lot. Some actors want to be very specific in terms of blocking where they will walk to, what they will do, what action they will do in the scene. And some actors need very, very little from you. And it's about, as a director, gauging that. Certainly from my perspective, it's about just trying to gauge what the actor wants and giving them what it is they want of you, and not giving them too much and not giving them too little. And then, in a way, exploring and playing with that. And, I never do this. I try never to do the same take twice. And that, you do one take, the second take, it's about trying to explore something and give a note that will push that scene on slightly further and explore another element of it. Sometimes that brings you to great places, and sometimes it doesn't. So I think you're kind of a guide as a director. You're kind of a guide and a protector of the script and the vision, and just making sure that everyone is kind of singing to the same hymn sheet, and just being there as a guide for them, because the actors, as I said, they do a lot of homework, and on this
they really have to trust you, don't they? Because they're in your hands.
I think it's mutual. I think it's mutual in many ways. I think it's they have to trust me, and I have to trust them. I think that's what it is. I think quite early, there's certainly stories of, lots of stories, but particularly stories of James Gandolfini on The Sopranos, where he was very, when new directors came onto the show, we would always test them quite heavily on the first day and ask them really probing questions of his character and of the scripts. And that was his way of deciding if he could trust the director or not. And it was his way. And so it was a challenge. And, on Kin, we didn't necessarily have that, but some of the actors would ask questions. Charlie Cox, I think, was a man who liked to ask a lot of questions, and they were always brilliant questions. And I think some of that is a test, in a way, and it's to test that, to make sure that you do know where this journey is going. And I think it's something that in the early days of shooting, it's just about testing. And we did a little bit of rehearsal as well. And in that rehearsal, it's about trust, so that they know when they go on camera, they can give themselves to the performance. And the same way I know when they go on camera that they trust that I'm not going to show them up, or that I'm not going to do anything wrong by them. And it's all about truth and emotion. And so it's a mutual thing. And when it works like it did on Kin so well, it was a pretty special experience, to have such a group of solid actors, and some of which, I'll be honest, I was very nervous about working with. Ciarán Hinds, I've watched for many, many years as an actor.
Yeah.
And to do a Zoom, Aidan Gillen, Charlie, but particularly Ciarán, I was a huge fan of Ciarán Hinds. And I remember setting up a Zoom with Ciarán to talk to him before we shot, and I was really nervous about going on a Zoom with Ciarán Hinds, because he's worked with some of the great directors and some of the great actors, and went on a Zoom, and he was just one of the nicest men ever, and was so accommodating and so welcoming of direction and what I had to bring. Yeah, so it's great, and it's wonderful. And the cast, all of them are amazing, every single one of them. Did you have any say in the casting? Were you involved in the casting at all? So, yeah, I mean, some of the main cast were put in place already by Peter. So Peter and the producers at Braun had put in place a lot of the main cast. So some of the day players and the likes of Hannah, who plays Charlie's daughter, I was involved in casting. For that was a long period of casting, but a lot of the kind of top cast, the main cast, were in place by Peter when I got attached. Can you tell me now, turning to the more technical aspects of direction, the things that strike me about your direction, looking at your work over the years, one of them is your use of depth of field, which I love, where you have very wide shots with a lot going on in the background and in the foreground, and you trick around with focus, and it makes the whole thing very dynamic and very interesting. Yeah, I think too, I suppose, even though we work in TV, this is a TV series, I've always been inspired by cinema, and cinema to me has always been an epic wide shot and then close tight shots. The middle ground has never really excited me, and never excited the filmmakers that would have inspired me. So I always kind of find that that's what excites me the most, is to try and find that wide world I think in some ways it's truthful of the character, particularly in Kin. It was that notion of, you know, here's the world as we see it and as it's set up to be, and then in here is the truth and the emotion of what the character is thinking and feeling. Certainly visually, that's what I tried to achieve with Kin. It was always that it was about setting up the world as it is seen in the sort of in the proscenium arch, so to speak, and then jumping in tight into kind of the souls of the eyes and seeing the truth and finding the truths are not the truths within the actors. Because I mean, a lot of the time it's about characters always put on masks, and in moments of togetherness, when we're with other people, we put on masks and we don't necessarily show our true selves. And so when people are alone, that's when we see their true selves. And Peter's writing. Peter's amazing at terrific writer, but a lot.
Peter's the showrunner, Peter McKenna.
Sorry, Peter McKenna, the showrunner. Yeah, one of the
Yeah.
things he's great at is kind of what I would call moments of isolation, which is putting actors or people alone. You know, putting them in a bathroom or putting them in a room or putting them anywhere alone, because, you know, and it's something that I think a lot of dramas are kind of quite scared of, because it's always seen as drama is conflict, and you have to have two people to have conflict. But most of the time, the biggest conflict we have is with ourselves. It's with ourselves and with our own heads and our own expressions, our own feelings and emotions. And I think that was something that, you know, certainly on this with me and Peter McKenna got on incredibly well from the very, very first day, and we spoke a lot. And I think part of the job of the director is, when trying to interpret Peter's baby, pretty much, is trying to get so much inside his head to understand what it is he was trying to achieve, and that for me then to try and take that and bring it to another level, or just bring that forward again. You know, it's like Peter had brought to here as a director. I always kind of feel it's about trying to take it a step higher and just do something different with it. And that's where collaboration is great. Again, the actors are trying to bring it to somewhere a bit higher, and the DP tries to bring it somewhere higher. And I think that's what's magic about television, is all these people trying to make something great, but always trying to make it even better than it can be.
Do you have an example of your use of focus and depth of field there that you could show us?
Yeah, I think I do. Let me put down the best one. I'll share my screen again. I'll share. I think there's two things in this one. This clip is a little bit about subjectivity and trying to express emotion within the camera, which is the first part of it, and then we kind of get into some of the emotion of the focus in the second part of the scene. So here's one example. I think it's a nice example. Probably pause there.
That's amazing. You know, she doesn't say a word, and yet, you know, so much is conveyed in that scene. You know.
Yeah, I think story-wise, it's a key moment in episode 2, where it's episode 2 was pretty much a study about grief, as a grieving mother, and at that place, I suppose, Amanda's head is kind of in a tizzy. It's all over the place. It's a kind of I think Peter described it as a snow globe of emotion, where her head is so shook up that it's all over the place. And so that notion of I don't kind of like to use handheld cameras so much, but in that instance, handheld cameras, it works very, very well, because it feels subjectively, it tells you exactly what the character's going through. And then she comes to the scene of where her boy was found dead. Again, the play of focus and being out of focus, and then kind of coming into focus, comes into sharp focus, brings her memory and brings her mind back into a kind of where it's the snow globe probably stops for a moment, because she's back to a place where she knows. And so again, I for me, the excitement, certainly some of the excitement of direction is the visual aspect, is trying to let the camera inform the character and the story as much. And it's a balance where sometimes if you do too much of the camera, you can take away from the actors, and so it's about balancing the camera as a mode of storytelling, while also utilizing and giving the best and making sure the performance isn't you're taking away from the porn. So it's about balancing the two things, and when that works at its finest, that's where kind of film, it certainly excites me the most.
Right. And one of the distinguishing things about Kin too, as opposed to your previous work, but there's always been a bit of it, is it's very dark. It's literally very dark. You know, there's lots of shadows in it. You're not afraid of shadows. The way I found it interesting that some people were comparing it to Love Hate, because Love Hate was the only other gangster series that was on. It's a gangster series. It's a genre, you know, rather than and it's certainly not a copy of Love Hate. But Love Hate was very much brighter in its visual aspect. As I say, you're not afraid of darkness.
No, I think no, certainly not. I mean, I think that some of that is a kind of something that's deep within me, that is like subconsciously somewhere, which is as I grew up, for some reason I always was a massive fan of film noir. It's like film noir as it was always a thing for me, and I always loved what they did in film noirs, and most of them were shot in black and white, and so there was always the contrast of kind of literally black and white, and so there's a part of me that's, I think it's ingrained in me, that darkness is quite excites me. I think we wanted to do was create something dark, but also kind of warm as well. We picked a very kind of warm palette, and that we didn't want to create something, a lot of crime dramas, or, you know, dramas that deal with themes that are dark tend to be kind of cold palette wise. We just I really wanted to play against that, and because our themes were so dark and sometimes horrible and scary, and we kind of wanted to kind of counterpoint that by creating a palette that was quite warm. And I also kind of find, in terms of shadows, there's always that thing, it's maybe a little bit of cliche, but there's always that notion of truth, being able to step back into the shadow, and so light and shadow is always a notion of when you can step back and shy away from the truth, whereas the light is harder. So there's always that kind of interpoint of truth versus lies, and also on. So there's two things. I think some of it is just subconsciously ingrained in my brain, because I just love that as an image, and there's other part of that is a storytelling part.
Right. You were talking too about that Peter loves to put characters in solitary situations. And I was thinking when I was watching it, that maybe some of that was down to COVID restrictions, you know. You shot a lot of this during COVID, during the strictest of lockdowns. So how did you manage, and how much did that restrict you?
We managed with great difficulty and more expense than would have been imagined, I guess. Obviously, it was there was a huge amount of protocols put in place in terms of what we had to do. We obviously wore masks. We were tested 2 to 3 times a week, sometimes more. So there was a heavy testing regime. There was a heavy process put in place of, obviously, when actors went on camera, the masks are off, but pretty much 99% of the time, other than when the camera turned over, 100% of cast and crew were wearing masks. And so at the beginning, I think everyone found it was going to be incredibly restrictive, and that we were never going to be able to achieve anything, and that, but actually, in some ways it helped us a little bit. And it's odd in that how it helped us was in terms of locations. Dublin became a little bit of a ghost town, obviously, because a lot of places were shut off and locked down. So we got access to certain locations that maybe we would not have got access to. And we got more access to places so in one way it was a hindrance, because shooting on the streets made it feel like a ghost town, but actually that kind of played into Kin's hands in some ways. You know, we kind of made the most of that by trying to, like I said, we got access to places, we got the ability to shoot places without people on the street or passers-by, and also in certain locations, buildings, interiors of hotels, who had been shut down were very welcoming of us there. And again, we had COVID officers and COVID compliance officers, and there was a lot of heavy restrictions put on us in terms of how we did it. And I think everybody with cast and crew were just really happy to be working, and we didn't want to have any COVID cases, which the production didn't, which was great, you know. So we kind of just were, I think we were very careful. I think we felt very privileged to be working and doing what we were doing, and so many people weren't able to.
action sequences that you were talking about there, and how they were in some ways easier to do during COVID lockdown. You're known for your action sequences, your car chases and your shootings and your fights and everything. Have you anything to? Can you go into that for a little bit, and have you any examples you could show us?
Yeah, I'll show you. I suppose a sequence from Ken was a shooting sequence in episode 3, which is probably one of the biggest stunt sequences I did, certainly on Ken. I'll show that first. We can talk a little bit about that and then dig into the stunt stuff afterwards.
You go in that door, Keith said Moore's halfway down on your right hand side. He's wearing a red puffer jacket, so it won't be hard to spot. See this prick? I got info that he's the one who shot Jamie, just in case he's in there too. After you've done it, keep going straight on. There's an exit door at the back.
I know, Jimmy, you told me.
I know, I told you. Just gone over so we're clear is all. When you get to that door, I'll be waiting for you. Michael.
Get down!
Wow. Yeah. I love the heavy breathing. You use breathing a lot as well. And the subjective camera thing was very much part of that sequence.
Yeah, I suppose a couple of things. The rain was obviously rain machines. It wasn't raining that night. It was probably the only night it didn't rain. It was the night we actually needed rain, so we got a selection of rain machines, which obviously very, very difficult filming, but lots of rain.
You have to do that in Dublin. It's terrible.
I know. It was a beautiful night when we landed there, but we had rain machine, and I think every other night we didn't need it to rain, it rained. But there you go. Yeah, I think one of the big things was obviously there was an element of Charlie's character that there's his epilepsy within the series, and so we try to figure out a visual way of exploring that. And when he is in moments of extreme or heightened stress, the epilepsy kicks in for him, and so we wanted to try and visualize that. And so we did that in kind of two ways. There's a lens baby, which is a lens that kind of creates a distorted look. But we've also mounted what's called a snorri cam, so that Charlie is actually holding the camera on his body, so there's no operator. He's actually got this rig, which like a backpack that holds the camera, and he's got that on, so the camera is actually strapped to him, so when he moves, the camera moves with him. So we did that on the front and on the back, so he's actually operating his own camera in that sequence. So it kind of gives that slightly distorted, slightly jarred experience. And again, like I said, it's very much a subjective, as much of that sequence is you feeling what he's feeling as it is. So it's the storytelling in a sort of a very subjective sense, which for me personally excites me as a filmmaker.
Right. Is it true that some of the stories that people have said that sometimes when you were shooting a sequence on the street that guards and passers-by thought it was for real, it was real gangster carrying on?
It certainly never happened when I was standing around. I can't say this. I'm not saying it's not true. I didn't see anything. The one now that happens is a lot of the time we actually have Garda extras, so people who are just actors or extras who come on and dress up as guards, and they're obviously wearing full Garda uniform. What tends to happen quite a lot is people mistake the real Gardas for the extras and the extras for the Garda, so that can be quite funny where there's someone giving us a bit of hassle on the street and you're trying to talk to a guard who turns around and says, I'm just an extra, and you're like, oh sorry, I thought you were the actual guard. and vice versa. When I think there was one night when we were doing a shooting sequence where I went up to there was a guard there. I wasn't actually quite sure whether there was a guard there, and I said, look, I think if you probably stood over there, we'd probably see in the back of the shot, this is the very end of the sequence, and he's looking at me like I had 40 heads, and I'm kind of going, what's wrong? And he kind of goes, I'm like an actual guard here to help. I was like, oh sorry, I thought you were one of the extras, you know. So certain that happened a little bit, but I didn't see anything else going on, but I'm sure it has done. I think Claire told the story, so I was too busy doing something else probably, you know.
Some people have said, I'm sounding like Trump here, that Kin is a bit light on plot. How would you respond to that?
I think it's kind of, I suppose, one of the things certainly that Peter had set out to achieve was certainly my understanding of it, not talking for Peter because I can't, but many times I did talk to him from what my understanding of Kin was. I think Kin is very much a character piece and a character study, and it's a study on family. And what we spoke about a lot was trying to make a series that, certainly for me, the series that bring me back, and the stories that I like I invest in characters. It's the characters I go back for, not necessarily the plot. So I see where people are coming from on that, and that there is a plot there that's not necessarily maybe the most complex plot, but I think what happens from a scriptwriting perspective, and I'm not a scriptwriter, but I think what you can do is I think you can overcomplicate it. I think so we decided to do on Kin was to focus very much on character and dig into character and spend time in the emotions and the world of the characters and explore that and the complexities of that, so we could dig into family rather than fill it in plot. And I think if you do both, somehow you probably fall in the middle ground, and we didn't want to be in the middle ground, so that was the focus. So I can see why people might take it, but for me, it's the most exciting part about Kin is that we are light in plot, and that actually what's driving is that this investment in character, and that we want to go, and that each of the characters have their own journey that we want to go and spend time with.
You talked earlier about how it's when you started off and you still really like to do it, a one-take shot.
Yeah.
Have you any examples you could show us of that?
I do. I can play two. There's two actually kind of pretty much back to back. In episode 1, there's actually 2 oneers back to back that play again the sequence of Viking, which is the Viking, the character in the show. He's kind of the hot-headed character in the show, and so again, I was kind of felt like I never wanted to leave this guy's. He's quite intense, and so the camera is quite intense when it's with him. So we stick with him and never get him a chance. Never lets up when it's around him. So I'll show two scenes that we shot, which are shot as one take. So the camera literally we do one take. The whole scene basically takes place in one take.
Wow.
Eric, calm down.
Don't tell me to calm down. You know that winds me up even more.
Okay then, take a deep breath.
That's even fucking worse.
Eric,
What?
shouldn't you go talk to Frank first?
No, I'm not gonna fucking talk to him, and neither are you. It stays between us. Do you hear me?
Yeah.
Just wait here, alright?
Where are you going?
Just stay here. Look, don't look so worried. Alright? Be back in no time. Okay?
that shooting reminded me of, unfortunately, today's terrible news from Santa Fe about Alec Baldwin and on the set of Rust, which is very unfortunate. However, I'm sure nothing like that will ever happen here. Everybody will be well protected, and we'll have the right people in position to make sure it doesn't.
Yeah, shocking. Yep.
It's just awful, isn't it?
Yeah.
Now, you would tell your approach is very visual. You were telling me that you think very visually in terms of how you're going to go about it. So, how do you draw out a lot of your do you do a lot of sketches, a lot of storyboards? How do you do that?
I would storyboard, I suppose, in terms of maybe a stunt sequence. I would tend to storyboard a stunt sequence. So the shooting sequence we just watched, the shooting in the bar, I probably would have storyboarded a little bit more than I don't storyboard dialogue scenes necessarily. And I think the more I go on, the less I storyboard. I kind of feel that storyboarding can be quite constraining. I think it's good to kind of think about it, but sometimes what can happen with a storyboard is you kind of you stick very much to the storyboard. And I think certainly as I get older and as I do more, I kind of find the more organic you are and the more prepared you are to be organic, the better stuff that you find. And so that I do a lot of prep, and I prep out a plan for what I think the shot might be and what I think it might look like and what I think the notes that I'll give the actors are. And I have all that kind of written down and I have that kind of in my head. But then I kind of go on the floor and pretend that I don't really have a plan, if that makes sense. You kind of go on the floor and kind of see what plan the actors have and what everyone else is thinking. And then, and most of the time, their ideas are better than mine. Or they have other ideas that are really, really good. You kind of go, that's a really good idea. It's a nice way of looking at that. And sometimes it's a case of, doing it that way or doing it my way and their way. And you kind of find a middle ground or something to explore. And between both ideas, you find a new idea, or as you said, you do a take of one and a take of the other. So I think it's about prepping and doing lots of prep and kind of knowing what might happen if something goes wrong. And that generally where your prep works is that when something doesn't work or something goes wrong, you can always go back to the plan and look at the plan, and that will kind of steer you back to where you are. And so doing the homework kind of lets you. Sometimes it's like. So it's like writing a bad draft. By writing out all the notes and thinking, sometimes you do away with all the bad stuff and you find the new good stuff. And so I don't storyboard as much as I used to do, basically. So I feel I think that being organic and allowing the space for stuff to happen on the floor is the way to do it. And I find that quite exhilarating, although it can be incredibly nerve-wracking too, because you're going on the floor pretending you don't know what it is, and you're like, sometimes not knowing what it is, but you always find it. And I think it's about knowing the script. It's always about reading the script, knowing the script, and knowing the script so well that if you know the story and you know the beats and the moments that you're trying to tell and what the scene is fundamentally about, what the heart of that scene is, if you know that, you'll never do it wrong in a way. And I think that's where your prep is. That's where the prep is great. Is doing so much prep to understand what it is you're trying to say, and then you'll never forget that. And then getting on the floor and realizing. And finding what's new on the floor and what your other collaborators can bring to it. Because as a director, it's about working with so many other collaborators. You from Peter, the showrunner, to James, the DP, to Derek, the designer, to all the actors. They're all other collaborators in your show, and so you kind of go. They're here to help you create the vision and support your vision. And it's about listening to them as well. It's not all about me. Certainly for me, so I know it's not about necessarily being a dictator. It's about being a leader. An energizer and someone who can kind of steer the ship well and steer with energy and excitement and fun and encouragement. And if you encourage people, I think around you and people around you are excited and buzzed and thrilled by what it is you're trying to do, they'll kind of jump on board that boat and go with you wherever you want to go. And I think that's what fundamentally a director's biggest job is.
So in a way, you're the anti-Hitchcock. Hitchcock prepared everything meticulously down to the last and didn't allow anybody to deviate in the slightest from any of it, and he didn't listen to actors at all.
Yeah. And look at Hitchcock's career, and here's me sitting on a webinar with you. So who did it right? I know, I'm joking. I think it's funny, I think it is about having a vision and there's certain things that are in my head that I know I have to do, and there's certain things that I know that will work. But certainly, just for me, I think it's quite liberating, and it's wrong for me. I think as a director, this is just me. to go into a room with a group of other collaborators and be so kind of dead set on what your vision is, to not listen to what other people have to say. And I guess what that means, I don't sit around having a big kind of group in where everyone shouts in their ideas. That's not what I suggest. But what it is about being open to that. It's about coming in and going, I will come in and I have a vision and I have a take of the scene and I know what it is I'm going to do and I feel where the camera's going to be and I have a take for where the journey should be and I have notes for the actors. But it's about being open to a suggestion within that. So I'm not saying you can go in there and it's a free for all, because that would be a car crash. You have to go in with a very set plan and idea what that is. And sometimes there's some days where I will not deviate from that because it's 100% what I know it is. But there are times when you have to listen, and you have to listen to if an actor has a note or a message about a line or a certain moment that they feel that they're doing something wrong or not telling, or they want to incorporate a certain action or moment or look, because for a reason. If it's kind of, in a way, it's wrong not to listen to that, or at least to explore that, and that you kind of go, there's no point if I shoot 2 or 3 takes and I don't necessarily shoot a huge amount of takes. I don't see the point in shooting 3 takes the exact same way. Some filmmakers do, but for me, I don't. I kind of feel, let's do 1, the second one we'll do this, and the third one we'll do that. And sometimes that's about exploring. Some people would say that the director doesn't know what the hell they're doing, but it's finite things. I'm not suggesting we go from one ballpark to another one. It's just there's small little tweaks. And certainly when you're working in television on a schedule where you have an idea of the journey, but you don't necessarily always know where that journey is going to end because of the way you're shooting in the schedule. You just want to make sure that you're covering all the bases, because grief, for example, is a huge thing within Kin, and everyone's understanding, or everyone's what grief is to people, and there are stages of grief, as we know. But I know people that have lost someone and have laughed. They've been in a death experience and they've laughed, and people would look at that and go, that's weird. It's a strange thing to do for someone that's grieving, but we do strange things when we grieve, and I don't know what they are. And so sometimes to be able to explore that is exciting. To kind of go to give a note to an actor to say, actually, maybe there's a laugh here, and you're like, why would I laugh when I just found out that my son has died? Like, I'm not saying it's right, but sometimes we do silly things when we grieve, and Peter was amazing at kind of exploring grief and trying to. And so what that is, it's about. I think someone I'd said before said it's a bit like a sand pit. Sometimes when you get on a film set, it's a little bit like a sand pit. You kind of jump into the sand, and sometimes it's about exploring the sand a little bit, kind of building a castle, then try and maybe build a double castle, and you're exploring and just kind of playing, and it's something that's quite malleable up until that point where you call cut on the scene, and even then. In the edit, it can still be a new thing where you find something new or different and explore it. And what happens is that, certainly on a TV show or any scripted piece, it starts off as a piece of scripted something, it's words on a page, and then it's transcribed into a visual thing that lives on a screen. And sometimes when you put them visual scenes side by side, when you juxtapose them, things that were on the page don't come across the same way, or come across better, or come across differently. And that's the magic of it. Sometimes you do things that you don't know are going to work, and sometimes take 3 will work better with take 1, and that's the editing process, and it's impossible to know what that is. So it's about, I suppose, exploring that so that you find the right answers. And you certainly can explore that in rehearsal, but on a TV show, I think we had 3 days, 4 days rehearsal on Kin, which is a very, very small amount of rehearsal time for 4 episodes. That I did the first 4 episodes. So you don't have all the time in the world to explore that. On a stage play, you probably have much more time to explore all that. So the time you put the stage in the play, you've explored all the questions. But on a TV show, you haven't explored all them. So sometimes you have to do a little bit of exploring on the set, I find.
We talked earlier about directors that you admired and some that might have influenced you. I was wondering if you had watched many of them at work and observed how they go about things and what makes a director's voice, in other words.
It's a tough question. I suppose it's funny. I kind of go, to answer the first part, directors that I kind of admire, I flip between, I think, different directors. I always come back to the same people, but I spend time in so I kind of find I'll go back to some of the older films and some of the and then some of the newer guys. But I find like someone like Jonathan Demme, who directed Silence of the Lambs, is probably one of his best known films. Like and uses the close eye line a lot in his films. He plays, obviously, if you've seen the Silence of the Lambs, Clarice and Hannibal spend a lot of time looking down the lens pretty much at each other. So I kind of found Jonathan Demme's work is quite inspiring. As a filmmaker, he's always someone that really excited me as a filmmaker, and how he tells stories. I think a voice in cinema is, I suppose it's a bit of everything. It's about how a story is told. The director is the kind of the creator of the vision, I suppose, in many ways, or at least the instigator of the vision that we see. So I think it's as much about placement of camera as it is about performances. So, you know, some directors, I'm always keen on authenticity within performance. It's always about the truth, and in some ways it's always about the truth for director or for acting, but there's certain levels of truth. I would say, you know, someone like Quentin Tarantino plays authenticity, but plays at a slightly more heightened level, and then obviously Tarantino is more excited by violence and kind of extreme and gratuitous violence at times as a filmmaker. He's something that really drives him, and it's kind of, so his voice would show that, whereas other filmmakers tend to shy away from that, you know. Whereas I would probably be the filmmaker that sort of violence, to me, the less scene of violence, the more violent it is in a way. So I always, certainly from my point of view, it'd be a bit like the shark in Jaws, where they had problems with the shark and you could never see the shark for so much of the film. You don't ever see the shark, and it's John Williams' music that makes you scared. And so by not seeing the shark, you kind of feel more scared than you do, I think, if you actually seen the shark, because the shark was so badly put together and didn't really work. It wasn't a very scary thing. And I think our own minds can create more fear than actually what you can portray on the screen. So yeah, I think I think that's what makes a filmmaker. I think that's what makes a director. I
know. Would you have another little glimpse of Kin that you could show us as an example of your work before we wind up?
Yeah, I can show you. I'm going to show you one of the things that we tried to do a little bit with camera was, I suppose the family are together, but in some ways they're as much disconnected as they are connected. So one of the things we did within sort of scenes within cars, rather than ever shoot a kind of a two shot of the actors in the car, we always kind of separated them. So we always, even though one is sitting in the driver's seat and one is sitting in the passenger seat, the way we shot them, they're almost miles apart. So although they're really, really close, visually they look really far apart and so disconnected. And for Jimmy and Amanda, the kind of husband and wife relationship, that's kind of always the way I seen them. They were kind of together and they're married, but they were more disconnected than they ever were connected. And so here's a scene where we try that.
Probably won't let us have the body for a few days.
The body?
Jamie, you know what I mean?
I didn't even want him driving tonight.
What?
I said that. I said he shouldn't be driving, but you said let him go. I didn't want him having his own car.
Wait. You think I wanted this to happen?
If you hadn't given him his own car, he wouldn't have been there.
I cared about him just as fucking much as you did. Just as much.
Wow, very powerful. The performance, Claire Dunn is wonderful. Her performance is so strong.
Incredible. And yeah, she's a powerhouse, incredible. She's, so many times on Kin, she brought not just me, but so many other people to tears in her performances, so just, it's a really powerful thing to sit there with, on a cold, dreary set, when you haven't eaten for 5 hours, and someone does a performance and literally just tears streaming down your eyes because she's pulled up. It's a very special thing and a rare thing. She's going places, I think, for sure. She's an incredibly talented person and one of the nicest people you ever meet too, which is always an added bonus.
I would think so. And talking of going places, what about yourself? Where do you go from here?
It's a good question. It's a good question. I guess I don't know. It's a hard one. I suppose I've always had eyes on America in some ways. I'd like to try and look into the US and see if I could get a little bit of work over there. It's one of the, suppose any filmmaker, most, Hollywood was always the place, and not necessarily Hollywood, but I just think America is the dream lives over there. There's a lot of work over there. I think I'd like to explore that, and kind of in the process of exploring that a little bit at the minute. But I suppose I think I'd be most happiest if I can just continue to tell kind of really, really good stories. I love telling stories. I always did it. You know, my parents would tell you I was always a storyteller. I used to tell stories at the Christmas table, and they were terrible, but I used to tell them for ages. And I've kind of always been a storyteller, so I think I'm really happiest just trying to tell stories. So if I can do that and tell them, get great scripts and get great actors and work with great actors and tell great stories, I think I'm very, very happy. So I hope that that's where it goes. And if it's here or there or anywhere, it doesn't really matter, I suppose. But I don't know. It's a little bit of it's a strange one. I don't know where I'm going to go next, but after this, straight to bed, probably, Agnes. But you know, other than that.
Well, one thing we're all certain of, you're certainly going to go places after this. There is no doubt about it. And we wish you all the very best of luck, Diarmuid. That's your wonderful piece of work. And thank you so much for a very entertaining evening. I'm afraid we don't have time for any Q&As. We're just out of time. So I'm going to thank Diarmuid, and then I'm going to say good night to everybody. And to say that if you want to join the RTS, go to the website, and students are free, which is very interesting. And we also have a very attractive offer for younger members, which is 30 under 30. If you're under 30, you can join for £30 a year, or the equivalent in euros. So thank you very much indeed, Diarmuid. And we wish you the very best of luck. And we're going to stay glued to Kin until the end. And we're not going to ask you what happens. I don't want any spoilers here. Okay, good night, Diarmuid, and thank you very, very much indeed.
Thank you, Agnes. Mind yourself.
All the best.
Bye bye.